welcome to the November 28th council work session. We are flipping the agenda around a little bit. We're going to begin first with Christy Hammett talking about Highway 99, then we'll go into the recycling program, and then the nuisance code. So, Christy.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't intend to take too much time with this item, but I did want to provide you with an update. Since the camp transition to Highway 99, we've moved people from the butterfly lot out there. We've been working closely with our partners at the county to establish that site. So a lot of the work has been going into making sure that we have what we need for this 30 to 60 day period of transition into the camp to kind of keep things moving forward. We're now in the phase of working on what are we transitioning to on that site. And as part of our conversation, we're considering a multitude of different things, but one of the two key things that we've been talking about, one is a potential dusk at dawn site, and moving forward with looking at that option, and also potentially some sort of a rest stop. The reason I bring both of those things up is because both require council action in order to designate the site as such. Right now, we're still in the decision-making phase and in conversations with service providers about what is the best path forward. And another thing that we're also being mindful of is monitoring the camp closely to make sure it stays safe and healthy for everybody there while we're working through this next phase. And it, again, you know, we talk a lot about the continuum of supporting the unhoused, and so we're moving along the continuum, if you will, as we think about what's best for the rest of the winter. So with that, I wanted to, one, make it clear that those are the discussions that are happening, and also let you know that we'll intend to keep you very informed as we move forward about exactly what a transition plan will look like, and we're working through that right now. We don't have, there's no timeline specific thing right now, but hope to have something to bring back to you. And so today, just wanted to give you the option if you wanted to take action, but you do not have to take action today. I could come back after at one of your future meetings before your winter break to take action on designation of the site if you so choose to do so.
Okay. So, Claire, just go ahead.
So appreciate the update. I wouldn't be prepared to take action today. I think it would be very helpful if staff could provide council with the information related to our, I mean, I know we had it in our packets the other day, but the particulars of the dusk till dawn requirements and siting, and just give us that background again. And then I am wondering what the status is of our commitment to have a day service center in downtown. So do we have an update?
Is that a question you want me to answer? Okay, all right, yeah, good. No, we actually are continuing to look at all kinds of different sites, and we've been in conversations with business owners and trying to get more people engaged in the conversation. We don't have any particular site in mind right now, but we're looking at inventory of that, as well as looking at the inventory for potential rest stop sites. And so it was really helpful to hear the energy at the table Monday night around the interest in trying to continue to find those. So we're actively looking for places to locate things, but we don't have anything to share at this point.
Emily?
Thank you.
This Councilor Swank. I joined the meeting, but I'll put myself on mute.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I'm concerned about the 100 people at the camp right now. Where are they going to go in the daytime? I don't think they're all going over to the Lindholm Center every day. So I actually see this as a step backwards for those people. And I don't really see us as sheltering more people at night. So a question is, since it's working, why can't it stay as it is? Why does it have to shift to a dusk to dawn? So that's a really big question, is why. I know the county's been suggesting that for a while, but I'd like to know why it can't stay the way it is. I'm not ready to take action on this today, not because I don't want to give the leeway to keep working on it. I would really like to do that without absolute approval, and the only reason I don't want to give absolute approval is it leaves out downtown. If we could say, do you want approval to do this here and downtown, I'd be all in. But I really want that day center downtown. I don't want everything to go out 99. So once again, I'm put in the place of, do I cooperate with the county, which of course I want to do, or do I stand up for a need that I see as essential downtown? And that puts me in a dilemma where I can't vote because I don't have time to reach out to people on all sides to find out what they think would be best. I know what I want, but I'm not the only one in the game. I found this whole thing extremely difficult, being caught between the businesses and the homeless advocates and the homeless. And we've been asked to make decisions very quickly, which I think is important because of the weather and our stagnant efforts. I know we've been working hard, but they're not really producing things in the city. This is a county, and thank you, county. We need to work together. I need everyone to work together, and I want to do it quickly, but I need more time than from the night before to a meeting. Thank you.
Greg?
Thanks, Mayor. What are we looking at specifically in terms of some of the best practices in other cities around day shelter? I know that I had kind of an anecdotal conversation with a couple of city councilors from Auburn, Washington, who talked about the fact that they had established a day center and that a lot of the issues they had with homeless camping in Auburn kind of, I don't want to say evaporated, but it kind of dissipated because the center was there to help process people into the right programs and services that they needed. And it did a lot to deal with the population on the street in a very proactive manner. And they felt that it was a good, a good thing for them to do. Have you guys done some outreach and research into some of the other communities around the Northwest are doing in that respect?
We are, and we're also, Olympia is doing some things right now as well. And so we're paying attention as much as we can to all the different ways that people are trying to address the gap in the need to help individuals who are unhoused. And so we're taking a look at that. We're also been looking at some of the bigger solutions that some cities have taken on with a campus-style model. And so we're looking at those things as well for more of a longer-term option. But if I'm hearing maybe that I'll be coming back, and so I'd be happy to bring back a little bit more information around the thinking that's going into that, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, because I think that, we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel on this one. And if there are other models that are out there that may, a piece of this one and a piece of that one that we may, be able to cobble together and figure out, I think it would be, something that would make not only the business community, but also nearby residents more comfortable with how people who are houseless are being served and how they're being processed through the system so that we can get them the appropriate resources that they need.
Betty?
Thank you. I was out walking with my dog at 7 o'clock this morning, and I didn't see any homeless people sleeping in the park. Who would want to lie down on that ground now? I think it is urgent that we have a place with a floor, at least, a floor and a ceiling. I agree with waiting a while. I don't think we would delay any actions if we wait to vote, would we?
No, not at this point. We're still going to continue to work on potential costing models for doing a dusted onsite, and we can bring that information back. What we wouldn't be able to do is implement any change between now and your next meeting if that were needed or necessary.
Thanks. I still think that using the old city hall, the temporarily vacant city hall lot, temporarily for 100 years or so, but I think using that for a warming place and a sleeping place was a brilliant idea, and I think we should reconsider that. In the meantime, there are a lot of empty buildings downtown, and people do need a place to be during the day to gather and to stay warm and dry. And I would think that the people who are annoyed by seeing people on the street would care as much in a different way as the people who feel compassionate about the people on the street. So we'd be helping everybody if we could get an indoor place. And I still think the old LCC building is a good thing. Scan Design's empty. I can't think of where else now, but I see a lot of empty spaces. There might be a way to work on using some of those spaces. Thank you.
Emily, you want a second round?
I was just also wondering what a delay would cost us. We can't implement any changes until we do vote what changes would be requested in that time.
Well, what we're saying is we can't officially designate the site as a rest stop or a dusted-on site without council designating it for that purpose.
Does that slow down any planning? I don't want to take the risk of keeping people from being sheltered.
No, I don't know that it's going to slow down planning, but what it does is, I think that we want to be thoughtful. We want to make sure that we're doing outreach with businesses and residents in the area to make sure we move forward in a time frame that does the communication portion of this in the right way. And so we've been talking with our county partners on that. What will not be able to happen if some emergent situation happened on that site and we needed to do something to take action quicker, which would be potentially initiating a dusted-on site, we wouldn't have the authority to do that. That's, right now, we're actively monitoring all of the activity to make sure that people are safe there. And so that would be the only thing. And we're not anticipating that, but that would be the.
So we could keep 20 of them there as a dusted dawn and the other 80, as a rest stop, and the other 80 could go to dusted dawn?
Potentially, yeah. We're looking at all options and making sure that the county has, I think, an interest in utilizing that property in the best way possible to accommodate the most that we can. So we're looking at all options.
And if things became unsafe before we are in session again, would the camp just be closed down and those people set loose?
That could be one path that is taken. Our intent is to make sure that we're helping the people at that site. And so there's a lot of triage work that's happening and it kind of going to actually ramp up even to make sure that we're looking for the right places for people to be based upon their needs. And so while we work through a transitionary plan, that will be happening as well. Could that happen? Yeah, that could always happen if something, we've experienced things in camps where we've had to make some pretty quick decisions, but not anticipating that, but just want to make you aware.
Well, I would be really horrified to have delayed a motion and put people on the street. But at the same time, I don't want to vote for a motion that would lock me into anything in this situation. So I don't know how to resolve that. One just quick comment is if we close down the camp as it is and put 100 people overflowed into the Lindholm Center, some of them might come hang out at downtown.
So I have Chris in the queue, but I just want to offer some possible clarification, so we might have time on December 12th, so that conceivably this could come back to you December 12th before we go on break. And just a clarification, is it possible, because I share some of Emily's concerns around people who've been able to be there during the day, and now we're thinking we're going to close it down during the day, and it would only be a nighttime shelter, and without a day center, we're just back. We've offered, so I have some concerns about that choice. And so I guess, in the interest of safety and continuity, I'd be pretty interested in the council giving you the authority to create a dusted dawn or shelter if you had to while we're on break. But I would not want to lock us into that commitment until we had a chance to know that maybe there's a way of continuing to operate that as a more robust camp where people have day services or it's I have the same apprehension. I don't want to close something down that's essentially working and replace it with a model that is, there's pros and cons in both ways, but it does mean
Just to clarify, so right now, the Lindholm Center is available to people at the camp, and they are utilizing it for showering, for meals, for laundry, and for, access to services. So we have that relationship existing now, and that would continue. So the people that are in that Dusk to Dawn site, if that's the transition plan, they would be able, there would be capacity at the Lindholm Center to help support those people during the day. And I don't know if everybody would want to take advantage of that or not, but that would be available to them.
Okay. Okay, that helps.
Mayor, the point of clarification.
Yeah.
I was stumbling around trying to find the number to get onto the call while I'm heading back to Eugene. So I missed the first 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm not. Could you clarify for me what the issue is that's on the table?
Yeah,
I think I understand.
The issue on the table is that as we're looking for more permanent solution and organization around the Highway 99 site, there are two options, both Dusk to Dawn and rest stops that could be all or part of the solution out there, but they both require council approval. And so Christie's just alerting us to that, and we're debating. We don't have to vote on this today. We're debating how long we can postpone that decision to get more information.
I would definitely,
Put me in the queue, please.
just to add on to that, I would definitely say that we need some action to make sure that we are moving forward as we kind of hit the deep winter months to make sure that we have the right systems in place. And so we would definitely come back on the 10th or the 12th and make sure that we come back quickly so that council can give us direction.
Okay, I have Chris and then Alan.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur. I think we need to come back relatively quickly with some direction forward and some options that we can pursue. And relevant to that, in terms of what you want, what I would hope you would bring back with you. For me, the overarching need is for whatever it is we propose. It needs to be safe, it needs to be secure, and it needs to be well maintained. And I think for me, anytime the city is going to be involved in any role in it, it has to be safe, secure, and well-maintained, because there's a huge liability for us if we don't do that. Plus, I think the residents are owed, if the city's going to be involved, the sense that they are safe, secure, and well-maintained. So if a decision that we're being asked to make affects any one of those three in a negative way, I'm not inclined to want to make it. If a decision we're being asked to make doesn't benefit any of those three, then I'm also going to ask the same question. So, for example, converting from a full day to a dusk to dawn, how does that help security? How does that help safety? How does that help management? If you can tell me how it does, then I'm willing to look at it. But if you say, well, we just want to do it because that's our policy, if it's not really helping it to be more well managed, but it's negatively affecting the residents, then I may not be necessarily interested in doing that. The same can be said for whatever it is we might look at downtown. I'm not opposed to looking at any location in town as long as those three criteria are part of it. I think if you can have a well-maintained, safe and secure place downtown, I'm fine with that too. But I think what people are afraid of is a place that's not well maintained, or it's not secure, or where you have emergent situations happening. I would be nervous about that as well. So I think we can definitely look for what our opportunities are downtown, but it has to be very clearly with the sense that whatever it is we do, it will be safe, it will be secure, and it will be very well maintained, so that it is a contribution to the problem and not just diverting it into a different kind of problems. That's what I'm looking for you to bring, is a day option, a night option, a combined option, but with those three criteria being very much front and center in terms of how we manage it. If the city's going to be involved, that to me is very important.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, I agree with what Chris said. Safe, secure, and well-maintained are really important parts of this. The hallmark of our success so far in all of this homeless activities and services that we're providing is that we've been thoughtful. And so I wholly concur with the rest of the counselors that are saying, let's not rush into making any decisions today, but let's get some more information, be thoughtful, bring this back on the 10th and 12th. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. I like the way Chris put it in terms of the different options of looking at it from that perspective. But this sort of smacks a little bit like bait switch on the folks that we moved from, that the county moved, the city moved from the butterfly lot out to 99, and then changing everything on them. So that also needs to be a consideration of what's happening. Then the final point I would make is that, or 2 points. One is that the site out 99 probably has too many people at it. So, and I think when you get too many people congregated in one place, that's when the problems start to occur. That's why we limited them in the first place. And I still think that that's true. So maybe there's alternative sites that we can work on as well. And then the final point is I still firmly believe we need something downtown, a day center or something. The folks that are hanging out downtown need a place to go. And if the business community doesn't like them hanging out downtown, they need to work with us in order to find a place where they can be. And so that's also a very important part of this consideration. And before I would make a decision on what happened at 99, we need to bring that part into play as well, and have those two things happen simultaneously.
Okay, thank you. And finally, thanks. Mike?
I was wondering if you could tell me who's operating the camp as it exists right now, and were we to designate it one of the other two options, who would operate it then, if so?
Well, the rest stop, we could look at a bunch of different options. That's kind of, we have different models within that system. But the Dusk to Dawn site would be St. Vincent de Paul. And right now, we're in contract with St. Vincent de Paul around the Lindholm Center, and they're providing great support. And then, obviously, the county and the city are very involved. And we have representatives from both agencies that visit the site pretty much daily to help take care of the needs of the campers.
Who is in charge of managing the camp currently? Whose responsibility is it?
I think it's, right now, I think it's the county, but I can check on that and get back to you. I think there's some role for St. Vincent de Paul, but
There are people helping with the effort, but I'm
Yeah.
looking for responsibility and liability issues. So responsibility right now falls to the county, and if we designate it in a different fashion, that responsibility or accountability for what occurs there may shift. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think that we have a shared partnership for that site. That's our intent.
Well, I don't know from a legal perspective, you'd have to weigh in on who actually has legal responsibility. If it's
That's what I'm
Dusk to
asking.
Dawn, that it's county property, they would ultimately transfer or hire somebody to manage that site. Could be a St. Vincent de Paul on contract, and I don't know how liability transfers in that. That's a legal question.
And, I mean, once a site comes under either of the two existing programs that we have code and administrative rules for example, the Dusk to Dawn site, the existing Dusk to Dawn site that's opened on 99 with St. Vincent de Paul, there is an agreement that is executed between.
That's what I'm looking for.
Right. So,
Exactly.
and
Right now, there's none of that in place currently.
correct.
It's just the county's on their own for whatever goes on there.
Right. Right, because it's not under any of our existing programs to which we have rules that have us execute agreements. That's correct.
But if we vote to do so, then we're taking on an additional responsibility?
If it was to come under, well, so if it was to come under one of our,
St. Vincent?
so if it was to come under, yes, so if it was to come under one of our existing programs like Dusk to Dawn, then yes, now our administrative rules and the requirements for the agreement, which I think, Counselor Seibert, you were asking for, what does that mean? Those would be triggered, and then it would roll forward under the umbrella as other properties are.
So we'll see the potential budget outlay for what that'll be when asked the question, is that correct?
When asked the question about if
If we would like to make it a Dusk to Dawn or a rest stop?
yeah, we will have financial information available.
Thank you
for
very much.
Okay, I'm a little worried about time because we have completely overrun, or almost completely overrun, the recycling. So Greg has asked for more and Emily's asked for more, but I just asked you to make it quick.
Just a quick question. Wouldn't we have to establish some kind of MOU with the county and St. Vincent de Paul if we move in that direction?
Yes, no, no different than what we're doing with St. Vincent de Paul now for their existing rest stop on 99. We have an executed agreement with them regarding compliance with our rules. When it comes to our relationship with the county, and the county is very involved in our 99 site, yes, we will have some sort of IGA.
Interagency
Yeah,
agreement.
absolutely. That's what we anticipate.
Okay, Emily, quick one.
Worst case scenario, the camp has to be closed down. Would it have 24 hours to vacate? And would that be enough time for council to have an emergency meeting to say at dusk to dawn would be okay to keep people from out on the street? I guess if it was closed for health and sanitation, there would be no 24 hours. So the only reason I'd have to not put it off is if we couldn't address an emergency situation.
We can certainly call emergency meetings. I don't know, it would be, because it's the county property and we don't currently have the authority to close it down, it would be a county decision, so I couldn't speak to that. But would we can gather up an emergency meeting in fairly short order.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and we'll come back to this issue in December. And now, with a lot of delay, we are ready for the recycling program.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Michael Wist. I'm the program manager for the city's Waste Prevention and Green Building Program, and I'm here today to give an update on recycling in Eugene. So in April of this year, we instituted a few changes to our recycling collection that included limiting certain plastics and paper products in the curbside recycling. That explicitly called out any plastics that were not narrow neck drinking bottles, so that included tubs and jugs and like a typical yogurt container or something like that. And this September, we, as part of our regular rate review process, we increased waste collection rates, in part due to the annual process that we undertake, but also in part due to the recycling crisis we're in. So I want to speak a little bit on how we got to this point. So recycling is an incredibly complex system in the way it works today. A bottle that leaves your house eventually becomes part of the global economy. I tried to simplify it as much as possible for the sake of this conversation, so please follow me. So when, say, a plastic bottle leaves your house, it's loaded onto a collection truck, which then moves across town, and it's dumped on the floor of a facility and then loaded into a semi-truck. That semi-truck leaves Eugene and heads to Portland, where it's sorted for all its different commodities. Plastics of different types are separated out, different types of paper, different types of packaging. And then they are bundled, sent on a ship across the ocean to China. And then ultimately, they are remanufactured into the products we buy and consume, and that all ends up on different ships and comes back to the United States, and the cycle continues. In late 2016, China launched a national sword campaign. In July of 2017, they announced it. Prior to that, the U.S. was exporting 16 million tons of recyclables, worth about $5 billion to China every year. A big chunk of that is west of the Mississippi, primarily the West Coast and Pacific Northwest. In July of 2017, China mentioned that they were going to greatly limit what they could accept from the United States, beginning January 2018, include mixed paper and a number of plastics. They had set a contamination rate, an acceptable contamination rate of 0.5%. Contamination means a number of different things. It means the residue left inside a container when it leaves our kitchen, salsa, any of that yucky stuff. It also means non-recyclable materials that end up in the recycling. It's basically the same thing when it gets bundled and sent to a processor. They can't have it in there. It'll ruin the entire feedstock, and then it basically all ends up in a landfill just in China. So when they reduced it to 0.5%, it very, very well should have been just 0% contamination. When we collect at curbside, Eugene's rate of contamination when it leaves our house is typically 10 to 13%. And after it leaves a Portland processor, it's still typically 2 to 3% contaminated on the boat to China. China did this for a number of reasons. They've been under considerable political pressure to clean up their environment. We had been sending them very contaminated loads for 30 years now. And it was a way to push out more of the polluting businesses there that accepted these materials in the gray area of their laws, but also they're looking to develop their own domestic recycling markets, and they have the market share to invest in that. And it starts to trickle down to Eugene in the sense that we have 6 material recovery facilities. They're all in the Portland area. Then these are facilities that sort into different commodities, and then they have brokers that get licenses to sell this material back to China. China limited the amount of broker licenses they were issuing, and to meet the new contamination standards, they had to slow down their lines at these processors considerably. So what we're experiencing now is a very large backlog of materials in all the major metro areas in the Pacific Northwest. Because of that, processors were now charging greatly increased fees to deliver these materials to their doorstep. We saw the cost of recycling per ton go from $35 to $130 for our haulers. And what that effectively did was make recycling twice as expensive as landfilling. So that's where you start to see the cost measures, the pricing measures we had to take. This gets to the point that recycling can only work if it's making money. But then this also trickled down to Eugene more specifically. As mentioned, we have to transport all our recycling up to Portland, or the vast majority of it, rather. We have limited local processing. The floor I mentioned that the materials gets dumped on is EcoSort. It's just put back in a truck and sent to Portland. Maybe some paper is pulled out and given to International Paper. International Paper will accept some commodities already separated. Lane County worked specifically with International Paper for their different transfer sites. International Paper was collecting some plastics, instituted a countywide ban, would no longer be accepting plastics. EcoSort, which is a subsidiary of Waste Connections and works with Sanipack, greatly reduced their line speeds, cut out part of Sanipack's and all our other haulers' recyclables. And then in talking with IP, we later found that they had filed for a concurrence with DEQ, which means they could have started landfilling all the plastics they received from Eugene. So that's when we, working with our haulers and working with the county, decided Eugene should probably take some steps. By limiting certain plastics, but not all of them, that allowed us to make sure that some plastics were still remaining recyclable for our residents. But it was also the grim reality that we locally need to start landfilling some of these items for the time being. And given that news, I'd like to talk about, put recycling in a little bit of a perspective. Like, recycling is really good. It feels good because it just feels so bad to throw things out for a lot of people. It takes minimal effort, and we get to say that we're doing something good for the environment. But recycling system as we know it exists to supply industry with a feedstock for demand for consumer goods, basically. So it's very much a sensitive and profit-driven system. It's also, recycling is also in constant competition with gas prices. As soon as it becomes significantly cheaper, when gas becomes much cheaper, virgin materials become much cheaper, and recycled materials become much less economically feasible. So it's in constant battle with gas prices. And really, as conscientious consumers, we've all heard the reduce, reuse, recycle model. Recycle is at the bottom of that for a reason. The way we purchase and the way we reuse, like you all have reusable water bottles on your table, and I'm happy to see that. By paying attention to what we purchase, and how we reuse consumer goods has considerable more impacts, beneficial impacts for the environment than simply thinking we can recycle everything, understanding how the system works. So it is very good. Recycling is very good, and the net benefits of it are still really good, but it is very fickle and sensitive and open to market vicissitudes. And while I'm talking about that, I'd like to talk about landfilling in the modern era. Landfilling is an absolute last resort for most products, but most products definitely. But the landfills we're talking about today tend to operate under the stigma that was developed about 40 years ago, before Superfund sites, before the Clean Air and Water Acts. The landfills we operate today are highly sophisticated and heavily regulated. State-of-the-art. They've managed to close down all the ones that have had serious issues in the past. They also, in Oregon in particular, we have incredible landfill capacity. Lane County, Short Mountain, has over a century of landfill capacity left. Oregon has a state has well over 100 years. So when we're talking about a temporary need to landfill plastics, I just wanted to make sure we add that to the bigger scheme of things and keep that in mind. Furthermore, when we look at what's actually in our landfill, take a look at all plastics combined. They make up about 9% of what we're seeing at a Short Mountain landfill. And when you start comparing that to other big items, particularly wood and food waste, it becomes pretty clear that plastics, just given their size and their weight, their ability to be compacted, are a much more easier fit than, say, wood and food, which combined account for 33% of our landfill competition. Food and wood also degrade and create methane, CO2, which are, as you know, volatile greenhouse gases, where plastics basically remain inert once they're buried and degrade very little in that environment. So the question also becomes, well, what are we doing about food and wood? Well, first off, when we launched our rate increases today, we also rolled out our multifamily recycling program, which puts more requirements on our haulers and our property managers to make sure multifamily residents know what their recycling responsibilities are, have access to information, and just know how to sort the recycling and have clean facilities to enter when they do that. We're in the second year of a construction material recovery and reuse program with Bring. We launched it last year as a way to help businesses who are looking to remodel or deconstruct parts of their businesses to get in there before those materials go to the landfill and thoughtfully take down and haul away and repurpose materials that would otherwise end up in the landfill. In the first year, we were able to divert 40 tons of recoverable material that was all been reused. And some of the clients in that program have been Hummingbird, Drawn, Wildcraft, and Now House, a couple of our Eugene favorites. Also, this spring, we'll be rolling out our residential food waste collection program, and that was delayed in part because of this recycling crisis. But I'd like to show you our rollout video for that.
Hey, Eugene, did you know that 40 million pounds of food goes into our landfill each year? That's a lot of wasted food and a lot of greenhouse gas. So we're introducing curbside composting to the city of Eugene. It's a ridiculously easy way to recycle your leftover food. Coming soon, all you have to do is put all food waste into your household's yard debris bin, where it'll be picked up and turned into nutrient-rich compost, making Eugene more beautiful. So join the movement to turn your leftovers into something useful. Visit eugenerecycles.org.
So moving forward with recycling, what can we do? Well, education is absolute key. We've uncovered a few things that we've put a lot of work into since the crisis, and that we didn't have, our haulers and us didn't have clear and consistent communication across the board. As people who receive collection service, we don't always know what goes where. Since then, we've worked on a number of cooperative pieces with the Register Guard. We had a video that starred me talking about what is acceptable and not within our recycling stream. We partnered with the county on a YouTube commercial and paid for 1,000 views on that. So local YouTube viewers would have to sit through a commercial which talks about what is recyclable in Eugene and Lane County and what isn't. We've had consistent social media updates. Every 2 weeks, we'll blast out a new pick and a new informational item about how to recycle, why you should ignore the numbers, popular items that are or are not recyclable. And we are developing a long-term reduce, reuse, and recycle informational campaign. That video is part of it. We're looking to have more TV presence and airtime, and we've budgeted accordingly, and we'll be producing videos in a similar vein to address different aspects of recycling, from educating on how the system works to what our roles and responsibilities are to be responsible recyclers. This is our original flyer that went out, and just to highlight, we learned a number of things. I just wanted to share that with council when we rolled this out. One thing is that it was very clear by the feedback we got, the response we got. I think a few things we learned now is when in doubt, throw it out. It really cuts to the chase, although people didn't really care for that messaging. This is a pretty big shock. So in the future, something we'd probably look at a little bit. But it was also a way to address wishful recycling, which Councilor Clark told me he is guilty of, where you just throw everything into the recycling, hoping that someone down the line will fix that. So maybe it worked for some, maybe it didn't work for others. Another piece is that if you look at the bottom, it looks like we just right now banned recycling of all those items, when really those were items that were never allowed and should have never been recycled to begin with. So a little bit of a lesson for us on how to approach communications in the future. It got the point across, but we probably could have done it with a little gentler tone. But I was recently in Calgary and saw that their city had borrowed this formatting, so that was encouraging.
For the record, I never recycled any of those things.
And thinking about long-term, what can we do? Is infrastructure investment in Eugene plausible? In 2015, our office did a study with Good Company well before the crisis, looking at what we might be able to do in terms of sorting and cleaning plastics and organic materials, so food waste. That study found that in 2015, it was marginal at best if we'd be able to. It'd require participation from all of Southern Oregon's communities that accept and collect curbside plastics. And would also put us into a flow control model where we would need to be guaranteed from those communities and our own that we would generate and turn over a certain amount of these recyclables every year for a set number of years. Revisiting that report for this presentation, given this recycling downturn, the parameters of that report are no longer plausible, just based on the prices of commodities. Lane County has been looking at a similar model, potentially to open up at the landfill, where siting wouldn't be an issue. There's been a lot of talk, and I think they've been putting some funding aside, but they've also are looking to relocate their Glenwood facility out of Glenwood, and that's kind of stepped to the forefront over this. And also, when we look at the recycling issues we have now, those things tend to crop up when you start talking about developing new infrastructure. Right now, we have low commodity prices. We don't have the material volume in the region. Our geography kind of puts us behind the rest of the northern metro area to make it a competitive and to attract financing. So we have an investment piece. And also looking at it from an economic development piece, most of our processing facilities in Oregon are they're very hands-on in that they employ a number of people to sort and separate materials. To hit that 0.5%, though, we need to look at increased automation. So if we want the cleanest materials possible, it would tend to mean less of an economic development piece and less job creation to hit those numbers that we need to continue this method of recycling. So really, and on top of that, what can we continue to do? Well, it's been a year since China launched into the national sword, and it's been 7 months since we've altered what we'll accept. It's just key to remain flexible and to adapt to the situation as it develops. A lot of communities have chosen not to do that. And what that means is that they just haven't made the changes to their collection But the same recycling issues still exist for them that exist for us. They haven't asked their residents yet to make the sacrifices or to let them know that certain things may need to be landfilled down the road. And depending on who you talk to, that's a message that's probably going to be more broadly spread pretty soon here, unless something quickly changes. So with that, thank you, and I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much. Claire?
Thank you. Well,
Can I be in the queue, Mayor?
thank you, Michael. So I have some comments and some questions. So the large landfill capacity that you mentioned that Oregon has, and specifically here locally, that's not going to last as long as projected if we start dumping all of our plastics into the landfill. And you mentioned that food waste and wood landfill can create other environmental harms, but eventually they dissipate, whereas the plastic never, ever, 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 ever will. So I think looking to our landfill capacity as a solution is a terrible idea. And I'm wondering if the percentages that are presented on the Short Mountain composition slide, saying, well, it's only 3%, is that reflecting the fact that we're not going to be able to recycle as much in the future? So maybe in the future it's going to be 5% or 7% or 11%. So I think we really need to be thinking about that. Does that Short Mountain, is that based on, 2015 numbers as opposed to 2017 or 2018?
Yeah, that was my
So it's
prior to this year.
before China implemented this new rigorous clean measurement. And I'll have to say, so I use Santa Pack as my hauler, and I don't recall receiving any education from my recycler about any new limitations, and I do not get my public education through social media or YouTube, so those venues don't work for me. And so it feels to me, as someone who pays attention to things, there has been very little public education and outreach. Now, other people who use other haulers may have had a different experience, but, I do recall the article in the Register Guard, but beyond that, it seems to be something that we're all kind of figuring out in a happenstance way, which I think does not help us meet our goals. Now, that graphic that you said you got some feedback on, I think it's a good presentation, but I'm curious why there wasn't chosen to use the numerical coding that's on a lot of plastics that when I first started learned to recycle was a very important part of how we did that.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy you asked that. We, in the Northwest, we don't have a number coding recycling or number-based recycling system. It's actually shape-based. So if you look at, say, a clamshell, something you get it to go salad in, that's one of the most popular misconceptions is that that's recyclable because it says number 2 on it. When really the shape of it as configuration means in the Northwest it's not recyclable. It never has been. Those numbers are actually industry numbers. They were never intended to inform any of us what's recyclable and not. So it's kind of breaking that trend too, in a sense. And we do, on a number of our blasts, we'll say ignore the numbers and things like that because we do operate in a shape-based system.
Okay. So I've revealed myself as a former Californian, and that's how we did it when I learned down there. So really, the other thing I was hoping we would get in this presentation, which I didn't actually explicitly call out in my work session poll, so not a criticism, but would like as some follow-up information or maybe even a follow-up work session where we might talk in more depth about what we can do. Sorry, I know I'm out of time. So last question. How are other Oregon cities handling this situation, and could we get some detailed information about that? And then I think the big question for all of us is how can we do better here locally to address this, I think, crisis?
Okay. Alan?
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to see what other folks are doing as well. That's the point. When Paul Hawken was here in town talking about his book Drawdown, one of the things he talked about was how we what we do with food in particular. And in his book Drawdown, they list the top 100 things we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and solve the global warming crisis that we have. And he put all of those 100 things into a rectangle and a whole by how much they contribute to reduction in greenhouse gases. The top whole third of that rectangle was associated with food, because the way we grow food, the way we process food, the way we transport food, the way we dispose of food, all creates a massive amount of greenhouse gases. And doing something about all of those things will help not only our greenhouse gas and meet our CRO goals, but could be economically and environmentally and beneficial. So getting going on our food and what we do with it, not just food waste, but all sorts of things around all the aspects of food, is a critically important part of what we need to be looking at. The second part is, while I agree it's not a really good idea to landfill plastics, we should try to reframe the way that we think about that, in that that's a resource that we will eventually want to go back and get. If we segregate out our plastics and have not a landfill, but a plastic storage place, so part of that 100 years of landfill space that we have available, if we segregate off part of it and just put plastics in it, we can come back and mine that when we need to, and we'll look like geniuses and clairvoyant about what was necessary. And I think that's something that we should explore a little further. Then finally, I've often talked about us creating our own recycling industry here, as an economic development and environmental and greenhouse gas project. And I guess I don't stop at, gee, the market drops, so therefore it's not cost effective, therefore we just drop the entire idea. There are lots of things that the city does where we subsidize what we want to have occur. The biggest example is MUPTI. We want to have multi-unit properties around, so we subsidize it. We give them tax breaks to be able to do that. And I think if we asked people in a survey what they thought about subsidizing recycling business so that it did, maybe even at a nonprofit or break even or a profitable circumstance, but we created a subsidy to get them to that point, using our property taxes or some other kinds of incentives, I think we'd get an overwhelmingly positive response to that in comparison to all the other things that we subsidize. So just saying that it's not cost effective, therefore we drop the idea, I don't think that's where we stop. I think we now need to go to the next level and say, what would it take to incentivize people to do this and make it work here in Eugene? And I'd like to see that information come back to us as well.
Great.
Yep.
Mike, and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. I was starting to itch there a little bit because I agreed 100,000% with the first two things Alan was saying, all the way up until where he said subsidies. But I kind of agree to an extent with that third one. But I think he's 100,000% right on the money. I grew up in Eastern Washington, not California like Claire here, but Eastern Washington. So did my dad. My dad grew up in a tiny little town where riddled in the entire area with farming and ranching, and he had his best friend named Charlie, and I thought, and so did he at the time. Charlie was brilliant. Charlie saw this problem. All these dairy farms produced an excess of something that they didn't need. And Charlie had saved some money and bought a big truck, and so he charged all these guys to go and pick up from the places where they kept all these cows the stuff that the cow produced that they didn't need. And he piled it up out on their country property, and then he turned around and sold it to the farmers for their fields and spread it around for them, and took a waste product and turned it into another kind of product and got paid at both ends, as it were, and ended up making so much money. He owned fleets of trucks and all kinds of stuff. Along the lines of what Alan was saying here, I agree entirely that this is a product. This is a raw material opportunity if we just look at it differently. And in a place that was built on the idea of innovation, in a place where we take rubber pellets and pour them on waffle irons and invent new ways to make shoes and, bottle bills and everything else that we do to make the world better here because we think of it differently. I think we're the perfect place to figure out a way to solve this problem. And I think that our job isn't necessarily to subsidize continuing to do the same thing so much as it is maybe incentivizing somebody to come up with a new thing. Now we have Hack for a Cause. We have, any number of things that occur in our community, angel conferences, where people compete for a prize on how to come up with a new idea, a new way to do things. And I am entirely in favor of the idea. I mean, look, we could be spawning an entire new set of industries. Look at Rexius and Lane Forest products were spawned from what do we do with all this old stuff, right? We'll turn it into a new product. I think we should set up some way to incentivize people to put their heads together and work together to figure out how to make this resource into a profitable product here. And I don't know what that looks like, but boy, would I support that idea of us creating some kind of competition for people to come up with a way to use this resource in a profitable manner. So I don't know how that would look, but I think we could be the catalyst for that. Thank you.
Emily.
Thank you. I pretty much agree with what's just been said. I do think we should figure out new things to do and spread it around. And I totally think we need, I say something funny, we need to do more locally. I love the idea of separating our plastics for further use. Dead dinosaurs, keep them together. A recycling facility here seems like a good thing to look into if it was profitable for China. Maybe it could work for us, and anything that would provide some employment would be great. Of course, we need more education, but I will say that if we reduce all this food waste from the landfill, that'll leave some more room for the plastics. So maybe it would last 100 years, but I'd love to see it last even more because we figured out new cool things to do. Thank you.
Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. So first off, I think these programs that you're working with the wood, and I have been waiting for a long time for the food waste to go out throughout the city. So it's fantastic to hear it's coming in spring. But you made a great point saying that, recycling is the last resort. We should be doing the reuse and not even using it all before. So I'm wondering, do we have other programs like this that are focusing on not the recycling end, but the before end when it comes to plastic products?
I mean, that's a key piece we're looking at for our long-term recycling campaign, which is in development right now. But it's become a crucial element of our food waste education campaign. So we've actually have a rescued food dinner, which is free to the public and invites people to, and gives the recipes of and shows people how to prepare food that otherwise would have been either buried in a farmer's field or thrown away, and creates, Marche did it this year and created fantastic meals. And again, through social media and in different media outlets, we've been having a more graphic and persistent approach to how you can better save money at the grocery store and plan meals from a food waste prevention perspective. It is, like I said, something that we'll be looking at for a much larger campaign rolling out this year.
I understand. I don't live near Kiva, but I understand you can buy food there. You can bring in your own reusable containers and buy like meats and stuff like that. So have we thought about maybe encouraging other companies, or at least spreading the word that these types of services are available for folks if they're looking to try to eliminate purchasing the products to begin with, the packaging?
I mean, I think that's actually available at most grocers in town. So, but I think it's something that we need more publicity behind. So.
Well, I will ask my local grocery that I go to if I can do it then. Thank you.
Okay, Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This actually brings up another topic for me, and that is food security. And the fact that we have very little of the food that we produce in this area that stays in this area, that's continually processed in this area, and that the vast majority of our food sources are coming from outside of even the state. How can we move to have a better and more robust program of being able to consume what we grow here, increase what we grow here, and thus kind of shrinking down that that whole cycle with food waste in terms of, trucks having to roll up from San Francisco and roll back down to wherever they need to dispose of food waste.
Well, that's a lot. That was a lot that would have to happen. I can speak to one thing that we've done, which ties in Hack for a Cause with some of that concern. Last year, we were a finalist in Hack for a Cause and developed and got the source coding out of it for a food waste app that would allow anyone with a phone and people either with a surplus in their gardens, organizations with surpluses, farmers with surpluses to post that, or if you have a food need, say, oh, I would really like to have 20 pounds of carrots. As a way to help connect people with surplus and demand. And we are continuing to try and develop a partnership first to house the completed app and also continue the financing for that down the road. One small piece and much more of a grassroots meets technology kind of approach to keeping food in town and linking people who need it with those who have it. So we've taken some steps in that direction. Otherwise, it's something we could look a little bit further into.
Okay, Alan?
I just wanted to amplify the point I was making about this being an economic development project potentially in recycling. If we think about it and reframe it in the terms of the opportunities that this provides, not only provides jobs, but it also provides the environment, it also provides our CRO goals about greenhouse gas reduction. When we start valuing those things, adding them all together into this project that could involve some kind of creative recycling that Mike was talking about in terms of incentivizing people to be innovative. When we start talking about that, that's something that we actually can do, and we do all the time. We incentivize, like I said, MUPTIs because we want housing. But if we want to have jobs and environmental recycling and greenhouse gas reductions, we can do that and cough up the bucks to make it happen. And so if we take that economic model and say, here's what it is today, here's projecting it out, and there's risk and uncertainty to it that will prevent investors from doing at it, and then reduce that risk margin so that with an appropriate amount of incentive, then you can get somebody to invest in it. And that's a common economic model that we should explore. We're big enough and in our community be able to have that kind of facility, especially if we team up with all the communities in Southern Oregon and have the same problem we do, which is we can't get rid of this stuff and people hate that we're throwing it away and we don't want to put it in our landfill and get long-term commitments to that, which is also part of this. I mean, for someone to invest several millions of dollars to be able to do this, they need to have some contracts that say, I need a supply of this stuff for 10 years, which also gets back to my other point, which is, in the meanwhile, let's stockpile it. We have a lot of space. Let's stockpile it, separate it, and keep it distinct so that we can come back and go get it if when we need it, because we will.
Okay, I am going to have to cut this off, and I should not have given you a second round. I know you want a second round, but I think you're going to get a second round because it sounds like we want to have another work session on this topic. Do you want a quick one? Okay.
What is required from us for you to act on what both Alan and I have said we're both willing to agree to, which is to create some manner for us to incentivize with money the idea of people innovating in this field?
Yeah, miracle of agreement has created the space.
I'm for it, brother, and I say we hit this hammer while, we hit this while it's hot here. Come on.
I think we would want to spend some more time looking at that and coming back as a potential option for you could be in an isolated or a broader conversation around economic development moving forward. But I think it'd be, it sounds like we're going to come back for another work session and we can sort of think about all the different pieces that could come back to that. And that
I sense an opportunity for us to
might be
successfully.
Yeah, my sense is that's not an easy 2-hour, 4-day project. That's an entire economic development strategy. And so it probably fits within the broader topic of economic development as well.
Great, and I feel the sense of time, so thank you very much for that report. We'll we will be circling back to this topic and appreciate that. And now we're diving into the long-awaited nuisance codes with a kind of a short timeline, so I may be asking for an extension. Please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mark Whitmell with Building and Permit Services. I'll try to be brief with the intro to this topic and save enough time for some conversation. So at a work session back in July, staff gave an overview of the current nuisance building code and zoning code compliance program. Talked about the enforcement tools that they use currently, and also had a conversation about some of the things that are realities in our current modern urban environment that can be a little bit challenging to address with current tools. Out of that discussion, you gave direction on a two-part approach to looking at the nuisance code. The second part of which is a comprehensive review of the nuisance code requirements, exploring what other jurisdictions are doing and looking at the potential of adopting or including a property maintenance code. So we'll be coming back at some point in the near future on that work. But the first direction we were given was to come back to council with some specific code amendments to give us tools to more effectively address three specific things: vacant buildings, odors related to growing and processing marijuana, and hoarding. So that's what we're here to talk about today. In your packet, you have draft code amendments to Chapter 6 of the Eugene Code, which we can refer to, I guess, as the nuisance code. So I'm not going to read the draft language, but I did want to touch on each of the three focus areas that we were looking at. I'll start with hoarding. Currently, if you look at an average, staff are dealing with complaints regarding hoarding disorder at a rate of about 2 per month. In a city of 160,000 people, 2 per month in one respect doesn't feel like a high number. But if you look at the impact of those situations, obviously to the people who are living with that disorder and living in those conditions, but then also folks in those neighborhoods, it's a very impactful problem. Also very impactful in terms of staff time to try to address those. Currently, the code authority that's being used is in Chapter 8 of the code, the provisions around dangerous buildings. A building can be considered dangerous for a number of reasons, some of which are around being seriously deficient in terms of fire and life safety. And that can mean blocked and obstructed exits or accumulations of garbage and things that constitute a high fire hazard or a health risk. And that's the authority that staff are currently working under to help people with these situations. It's, if we get to a point where we've determined that a building meets the definition of being dangerous, what happens next is clearly outlined in the code, and it's pretty extreme, which is the first thing that has to happen is the building gets vacated. People have to move out, and we secure the building and post it as unsafe to occupy. The draft code language does a couple things that help with this. One is it more specifically identifies the conditions that are associated with hoarding. Some things like the fact that those folks often don't have their power turned on or don't have access to clean water or sanitation or other conditions that are part of that problem are more specifically identified in the code now, and the authority to address it is in Chapter 6 under nuisances. So we have the tools to look at it and enforce on those conditions the same as enforcing on other nuisances. All of these hoarding cases, they're very unique. People's situation's unique, the conditions they're in are unique. And a lot of times would be good to have additional tools to maybe help someone with those issues without removing them from their home, or maybe they're temporarily removed from their home until an area can get cleaned up and made safe, and then they're allowed to come back in while the rest of the problem's addressed. So the draft amendments get at both of those things. Secondly, odors related to marijuana. The current odor nuisance language we have focuses or requires that a property be in a state or condition that's causing an offensive odor. That can be challenging when you're trying to address a complaint somehow related to marijuana. You know, is it the state or condition of the property that's causing the odor, or is it something else? The draft language changes that focus to be on the offensive odor itself and not on the condition of the property it's coming from. So it speaks to if an odor would be considered offensive by persons with reasonable sensibilities and it's emanating or traveling across property boundaries, and it would impact the use and enjoyment of a neighboring property. Those are kind of the three criteria that would make it potentially a public nuisance. And the draft language includes a number of factors to consider when making a determination about whether the odor would be offensive to a person of normal sensibility. So that should help with being able to address the complaints related to marijuana. There was a spike after legalization in the complaints that were received that were marijuana related. That's come down somewhat, but they're still dealing with roughly 30 per year that are marijuana odor related. And lastly, vacant buildings. So the draft language now specifically includes under the things that can be a public nuisance the allowance or existence of derelict buildings on a property. And there's a new definition in the draft code of what constitutes a derelict building. Essentially, it's a building that is either unfit for human habitation, which is also now defined in the code, is or is becoming a hazard, or meets one of a list of criteria that would make it considered to be detrimental to general public health, safety, and welfare. And in that list are things like vacant and unsecured buildings, or buildings that might be an attractive nuisance, and a number of other things. The draft language also adds another tool to get at some of the derelict or vacant building problems, which is the idea of receivership. So the city would have the authority to apply to a court to have a receiver assigned if there's a building that's been determined to be dangerous or determined to be a public nuisance and the owner isn't addressing it in a timely manner. We would have the ability to apply to a court, have a receiver assigned who would have the authority to take control of the property and manage through the abatement. So I think, yeah, we have 15 minutes left. So I think with that, I'll leave it open for questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I have Chris, then Mike, Greg, Betty, and Alan. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you. I'm very, very appreciative of your work on this, and I will say it's great as a start. I mean, we're not eating the whole sandwich in one bite, but this is a pretty good first take at it. I'm assuming we'll be doing this repeatedly with other topics, but I like the ones you've already chosen. I think this is a good starting point. And as some of you know, I am personally engaged in a similar situation. And so I think what you have done with the code here incredibly gratifies me, because I can see a path forward for a situation that I'm dealing with in terms of what you're proposing to do here. And I think beyond my personal stake, I think just in terms of Eugene, these are good things to do. I looked at the similar codes from other cities when this first came around, and I think you have cherry-picked some really appropriate and good things for us to deal with. We may have future things to work on, but I think as a starting point, these ones seems to be the ones that I hear the most about. And so I think taking them on first is a great start. So I'm ready to move on this, and I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in favor. I'll support. Okay? Bar none. This is good stuff. Great idea. Good work. There's only one part of this that concerns me a little bit, and so since this is step one of hearing process and everything else, we can amend language in an ordinance when we come to final approval. I would prefer that you gave us suggestions on how to amend a part of this that I really want to amend, okay? And it has to do with the odors part. It's not that I don't disagree with your intent. I absolutely do, and I agree with it. I, for example, live in a duplex. And I'm very, my back sliding door and the neighbor's back sliding door are in very close harmony. So they get to smell what I'm cooking for dinner sometimes. And, we're going to create more homes in very close proximity to one another, I have a sense, in the near future. And so while I agree, absolutely, especially around the issue of marijuana and odor, my problem is that the language is incredibly subjective and there's nothing measurable in it. So, is offensive to individuals of normal sensitivity. And it's up to the enforcing officer to determine what that means. For me, that gives me one of these for a minute, because there's all kinds of room for that to not end up being equal application of the law to everybody in all circumstances. So I'm going to be a lot more comfortable. I will vote to pass it because I trust our staff, but I don't know what tomorrow looks like in tomorrow. So I would encourage you to get more specific and measurable about the language as it pertains to what's an offense, and try and remove as much subjectivity as you can that allows the discretion of the enforcing officer to kind of decide who's doing wrong and how. Thank you.
Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Good work. I have a question. In attachment A under number 1, unguarded machinery, equipment, or other devices which are attractive, dangerous, and accessible to children, does that include automobiles? Or does automobiles come under another category? Because right now I'm dealing with a problem in my ward. I won't name the street, but where there are at least 6 abandoned, broken down vehicles that I have not seen move in months, and with broken windows and other defects, flattened tires, that kind of thing. Would those vehicles come under this clause of unguarded machinery? Or is that be in another area?
We do have other code in Chapter 6 that addresses vehicles that are not operable, that haven't moved, or that are just being stored improperly. I don't have
like on the front lawn.
It's in Chapter 6, yes.
Yeah. I'd like to see if we can get that activated in one area of my ward. So,
Okay, Betty?
Thank you. First, one of the times that I agree with Mike, odors are very subjective, and I can see this being someone puritanical thinking marijuana is a bad thing and saying that smells bad. I know people who are vegetarians who think that meat cooking smells bad and are very offended by it. And I don't understand how we could, and as Mike said, we're going to, if we cram people closer together, more and more we'll be smelling everyone else's dinner and whatever else they have. So I'm concerned about the subjectivity of that also. I even know people who think coffee roasting smells bad. Hard for me to understand, but there are people who think that's bad. I was mainly concerned about fire dangers and vacant buildings, which could be, a vacant building could be a fire danger too, but I didn't see anything about dry grass. Is it in here?
So, dry grass is in chapter 6. I actually brought the code because I know that has been a concern of yours. And so I brought the code that I can pass out, but it is addressed in chapter
I know
6.
someone in my neighborhood tried really hard to get something done about lots nearby, which he was imagining fire sweeping through the South Hills. This is in the summertime mainly that it's a problem. Wasn't just the way it looks, but the fire danger. And he was unable, after complaining a lot, to get anything done. And did get someone to come and look, but that was all. And I was wondering, how would you know if someone's hoarding, unless they're hoarding outside?
So we do have a lot of folks that come into contact with either family members that get concerned because it gets so bad, but they can't get a response, being that their family. We have neighbors that contact. We have a variety of different complaints that come from people that pass by the house and notice that all the windows are blocked with various items and just call and share concern for the resident.
So can you not keep your drapes closed?
You can.
If you, I think everything should be open, but not everybody agrees with that. I noticed something about electric fence. I know some people have electric fences to contain their dogs. There's something in here that says a fence that would be harmful is not allowed?
Which section that is?
It's D.
Yeah, so electric fences aren't actually allowed within the city of Eugene.
I can't hear you very well.
I have a cold, so I'm just trying to.
Oh, sorry.
Electric fences are actually not allowed. That's not a change we've made. That's an
Well, then
existing.
people who are now using electric fences instead of wooden fences or the chain link or whatever.
That's not how they
That's
work.
not how they work.
They shock the collar, shocks the dog, not the fence.
Wire doesn't have any shocking.
Oh, well, I don't have one, so I don't know. Okay. When people tell me they have electric fences, I thought it meant if the dog runs into it, it would bit. No, it's not that true?
Nope.
So if people aren't wearing collars, they will.
Wire sensitive to the collar and shock it.
You can't do that in the city, though, for deer?
Okay,
What she's
got it.
talking about, yes, you can.
They're torturing their dog.
Yes.
Oh, well, I learned something. About vacant buildings, are we really going to, do we have anything more effective? I hear from people frequently that there is a building where no one lives, and frequently that, I'm out of time, I guess. That's a novel thing.
So you need.
Yes, I want to go a second round to talk
Okay.
about vacant
All right.
buildings.
Okay. Alan?
Yeah, on the grass, the fourth National Climate Assessment just came out. One of the things it said, especially around the Northwest, is that wildfires are going to increase. What we're seeing now is going to become the new normal. And so tall grass that potentially could start fires is going to become a bigger problem, and being able to react quicker is going to become a bigger problem. Our system is not set up to do that. And I'd like to figure out how to make this work faster, especially with regard to that, in the summer, especially in regard to areas where there's limited road capacity for egress. So that, we'll put that on the agenda. Interesting that the history of this whole nuisance thing actually is really long. Glad it's not a sandwich, because we'd be starving to death. Because this is like over 2 years old. It all started with my request to talk about on-site management of large apartment complexes, which turned out not to be the problem as the smaller ones, and we couldn't require that. So we started talking about nuisances, and then we started, and it morphed into that. So this is a good start. The phase 1 and phase 2 parts, but I'm much more interested in the second part, which is really about the livability issues, which is really what I get most complaints about, and the ones that bug me the most personally as well. But those tend to be more about aesthetic and community standard issues, which are much tougher to do. and other college towns, Corvallis was one, Madison was another one that we looked at, and we looked at a whole bunch of these. I think Boulder maybe have been one. They've dealt with some of these issues a lot more in a more straightforward fashion, with the ability to actually have some accountability on them. You know, like not having couches sitting on the side of the road forever, things like that. The issue that I have with this stuff is, though, it's all about unoccupied and vacant buildings, and probably related back to the second part, which is the more aesthetic and community standards, is it's the occupied buildings that don't deal with this stuff effectively is important when to address. You know, when we talk about habitation, I just looked it up. It says live in, house or home. So it brings up two things. What about occupied places, and what about businesses that aren't necessarily homes? Does this apply to businesses as well? That, because there's more and more businesses that are in residential structures.
And they would think under the definition of derelict building, it could be an occupied building if it's unfit for human habitation due to the definition of, you know, having unsanitary conditions, infestation, accumulation of filth or contamination, lack of ventilation, illumination, sanitary facilities. Some of the same, like I say, some of the same conditions that we see a lot associated with hoarding that could make a building that has a hoarding condition in it be derelict. It could also be an inhabited building that isn't a hoarding condition, could also fall into that criteria and be considered a nuisance and still have people in it.
Okay, so that I like that broader definition of it, because it doesn't mean to just have their, I mean, the poster child for me is there's a business right near Sweet Life and the Fisherman's Market on 6th Avenue, which is in horrible condition, and we have absolutely no tools to really deal with that. Does that circumstance, would that fit here?
I'm not familiar with that building. I mean, I've seen it, but I'm not really familiar with the condition of it, so I don't know for sure.
Yeah, that's my test for whether or not this works. So I'd like to think about that, and I'll need a second round as well.
Okay. All right, Emily.
Thank you. I would like to see fire added under debris, letter C. It just says public health, comfort, unsightly, or odor. And when I'm walking around in the summer and there's great big piles of dried grass and sticks, I just see a cigarette butt lighting up the whole street. So I'd like to see that. I'm concerned about the smells associated with marijuana. It doesn't seem different than loitering, void for vagueness. I don't see any parameters of how to judge that. And I'm wondering if all of this is going to be like the wildlife. Will it be complaint-driven, and what will the penalties be? Those are my questions.
I mean, currently all of the enforcement of the nuisance code is complaint-based. So to go to a proactive system is something that could be discussed, you know, when there's the comprehensive overall relook at the nuisance code. But yeah, everything now would be complaint-based.
Because I do know a long time ago we inspected for grass that was too tall, and then for money reasons we stopped doing that. What about penalties?
So civil penalties follow the same process. They get noticed through a notice of correction, and then we would apply civil
Like the
penalties.
wildlife feeding. Thank you very much.
Okay, Claire.
Thank you. So I appreciate these updates, and I disagree a little bit with some of the critique around the odors, because I was looking specifically at that. So you talk about a persistent odor, the frequency, the duration, the strength and intensity. And so you do, I do think you have some measurables in there. They are still somewhat subjective or could be applied in a subjective manner. So I'm not adverse to the idea of scrutinizing that even a little bit further to see if we can get a little more precision in there. But it's making me think, so I definitely have some constituents who have complained and have tried to get enforcement recently around marijuana odor. from a neighbor, and it reminds me where I live. When I first bought my house, what is now Territorial was Boyd's Coffee Roasters, and occasionally the odor from that would come my way. I also occasionally, if the wind's going the right way, smell the hops from Ninkasi, maybe Hot Valley. But it's not persistent, it's not frequent, and the duration is not very long. So, as I think about the measurables that you have included, I think these are workable, not that they couldn't be improved, if you are aware of a way that might be done. So I think making our code as objective as possible is obviously the goal, and I think I agree with Councilor Clark. I trust staff. I have seen you in action and work very hard to be as objective as possible, but you will not be occupying your roles forever, and our code needs to not be dependent on who happens to be enforcing them at the time. As far as this discussion around dry grass and the hazards, this is our nuisance code and is really, I think, supposed to be applying to some hazardous situations that, like things not accessible to children who might become injured. But dry grass might start a catastrophic fire. That really seems like a greater public safety matter that should be tackled, through some of those mechanisms as well, and not necessarily just through our nuisance code. And then the property that Councilor Zelenka was referring to is the former Tom's Tea House on the corner of Monroe and 7th, and it actually looks a lot better right now than it did about a year ago. So I can't say what it looks like on the inside. But it's still not beautiful, but it's not looking quite as derelict as it had at one point.
Okay, we have a couple of people wanting a second round, which will require
Move to extend for 10.
Good. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, great. All right, so now I have Mike, then Betty, then Alan.
6.116. The enforcing officer may apply to a court of competent jurisdiction for receivership issues. What's a court of competent jurisdiction?
It depends. It could either be, it's somebody that would have jurisdiction over the matter. So depending on it would be Eugene Municipal Court, Lane County Circuit Court. I mean, it wouldn't be, you couldn't apply to.
What's the purpose for the vagueness?
This is taken, so the direction was to use the other cities as examples, and there was a very, very consistent method in which the receivership authority was brought into the other city codes, so we used the same language based on council.
Is vagueness to expedite? Is that if you can't get into one court faster than the other, is that? Other than,
it just leaves it open. It's not, we don't tend to have, if you look through our code, we don't tend to identify a specific court.
Okay. On page 2 here, what is it? It's because the code jumps, sorry. It's the part that deals with hoarding. Let's just go that way. As I read this, first of all, is the major danger from hoarding the public, the general public at large, or the individual living in and those interacting in such circumstance?
So there are a number of concerns with hoarding.
Right.
One being the resident that's in there having adequate egress, ability to get out should they have an emergency, a fire, anything like that. The other is for a first responder who gets called to the residence. Can they maneuver through the home safely?
It's about health and not just safety of movement, right?
Right, both. And then when you have hoarding situations, you often have pretty extreme sanitary issues.
Right.
Whether it be
people using their living room for the bathroom.
Exactly.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, because when I read this, it says filter contamination, lack of required, illumination, sanitary, heating facilities, not connected to approved water or electricity, injurious to health and safety. Why is it that we don't enforce on the same basis for people who live by the river? Is there a reason? Do we have statutes that would cover that?
try, but.
If you're offering up, I'll.
Because, and here's why, because we're pumping quite an awful lot of bacteria into that river. Part of this, for example, and part of this, you call out construction sites as not subject because of the nature, but an awful lot of other places as potentially hazardous to the public. And there's an awful lot of money spent in the process of complying with an awful lot of these, as Alan was mentioning, in businesses too. And I think that's a good thing. But we've spent as a public a great deal of money and required people publicly, privately, to pay a great deal of money for water quality issues and for our permit that go through the Willamette. And we're dumping tons of bacteria into that river, literally, with human waste. We let it happen all the time, every day. And we're not dealing with the nuisance, sorry to use the language that way, but of potential health issues for the way people live and the impact on the environment that we don't enforce on. Can somebody tell me why we don't enforce?
I don't know the answer to that or where there might be authority for that, but this section of the code here specifically addresses buildings and structures. So it doesn't address conditions around tents or campgrounds or, there may be requirements in other places that do get at that, even through maybe like DEQ regulations and that sort of thing, or other angles to get at what you're after. But the reason that this section wouldn't apply to a informal camp along the river is it's specific to constructed features, buildings, and structures.
Mr. Manager, do you know why we don't have a similar nuisance code, and I'm using that word in quotations, for health standards of how people live for people who live by the river? Why don't we enforce, or do we not have it in the code to enforce such things?
I don't know if we have a nuisance code that applies to people camping by the river. I don't know if you know that or not.
So we do enforce, if we get a complaint, for example, right now we're working on a couple of them that are owned by the railroad. We do enforce those we issue order to corrects. Most of the time we don't. If it's U of O, for example, we've done, the union we've done, we work with them to try to address the camps. Public Works works with them quite a bit to address the camps, requires them to have facilities. But as you might imagine, it's challenging to chase those camps around.
Right. It's a weird question for me to ask, I recognize, but I also recognize that there are an awful lot of people who hear our proceedings today and think it perhaps, I don't know the right word, unfair, that we would be so specific in what we expect of people in homes, and yet what we expect so little of other people, and see that as unfair. Thank you very much.
Betty.
I can have the time Mike didn't use, right? I thought Mike was channeling John Brown for a while.
Was trying. He's a constituent.
Yes, well, he's right about the river. The question I still wanted to ask was about unoccupied houses. I get complaints about, frequently about certain houses that are left unoccupied year after year. And they say that the owner might come every few years and do a little work and then leave it again. Is there anything that prohibits just leaving a house in a neighborhood without an occupant?
In the current code as we stand today?
Or current or proposed, either.
Yeah, in the proposed language, if that house was left vacant and it became derelict by definition, so vacant and unsecured, creating some kind of hazard, being an attractive nuisance to children, being a place where unauthorized people were choosing to reside, that sort of thing, it could be considered derelict, and we would have the ability to have it abated under the draft language.
That's all, thank you.
Okay, Alan.
Yeah, just finish off on the livability issues, part two. I guess I'm willing to push the envelope there a little bit more than maybe most people would be. So when we go back and look at that stuff, if we can bring back some options that push the envelope in that area, so we can have that a robust conversation about how far we want to go. Because some of these, I'd like to see what we can do in that regard. This receivership authority. I guess, can you explain how that would work and how long it would take? And it seems like it would take forever to do this.
I don't know timeline-wise, but.
My recollection in trying to understand through state statute is that these are properties that are currently in the foreclosure process through a bank, and they are allowed first a 60-day period to address those issues. If they don't address those issues, we do, as the city does, have the option to do an abatement first. But if there continues to be an ongoing issue, we can apply to the court for receivership. I guess timeline would be as soon as we get through the court process and the judge rules.
Yeah, and it's the Oregon Housing Receivership Act is a very specific statutory construct that this would be giving us the authority to utilize. And so I can go through that and kind of back out what that timeline would be and get that to you during your next public hearing.
And other than homes that have been foreclosed and are vacant because of that, right? This is meant to apply to beyond that example.
I don't know if I don't believe it's limited to foreclosures, but I can double check.
That would be very limiting.
Yeah.
If it were.
But we are, what many of the codes you would see had is they incorporate by reference the actual statutory provisions. That's not how we do it here in Eugene, because then every time the statute is amended, you have to do what we do for the traffic laws, and you have to just re-adopt it, and so that is not the best and most efficient use of your time. And so you don't see a specific statutory reference to it, but it is utilizing the existing statutory structure that gives us the authority to do it. So whatever the parameters of that are is what we have to live with for
Okay, more info on that would be good. Yep. On the odor stuff, it does seem very subjective. There are some things in here that are metrics, but maybe it just needs to be tightened up. Maybe there needs to be some parameters around frequency, duration, strength, of intensity of the odors that we could wrap our arms around a little better.
Yep.
Yeah, because make it more objective, tighten it up. How many people do we actually have doing nuisance and code enforcement, or nuisance abatement?
We have 5 FTE.
Doing this full-time? Okay. And how many complaints a year do we get?
We are at about 1,800 new complaints a year.
Wow.
Well, and this will make it go to 2,500. But most of those actually work where we don't actually end up going to court. We just go and say, knock it off, and it usually works. Or
10 new ones a day. Wow.
Yeah, 10 a day. And then 2 quick questions. One around vegetation. You said there's a separate part. Can you get us that part? Oh, yeah, you have that? Oh, cool.
Product.
So I know that blackberries is one thing that is the only vegetation that we've actually regulate because it's so prevalent here. I had a constituent talk about escaped bamboo that escaped from his neighbor's house and is actually growing up in and up through his deck. And it's not his, he didn't plant it and it's escaped, and they're notorious for that, and apparently there's no code to deal with it. Can you check into that for me? And I don't know if this helps with it. I don't know what obnoxious vegetation means yet, so I'll have to find out more about that. But
Alan, we have to vote, and we're 5 minutes over, so you have one more?
Okay. What about parking on the front lawns?
Yep, that's covered in chapter.
That's covered too? That's illegal, okay.
Okay. Great, okay.
Remember,
It's
I
on the
get to
table.
keep going. Awesome. I move to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing on the draft code amendments set forth in attachment A.
Second.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. And manager?
Just to clarify, so what will go forward is what you see. We are taking all of your information, and so our intent will be after that hearing to have another public or work session in which any and all of this conversation can put back into an actual ordinance if you choose to do that.
Perfect, thank you. So that passes, and we are adjourned. Thank you.